Hey everybody, Chad Wesley Smith here for Juggernaut Training Systems. Today I'm going to be tackling one of the most common questions and in a lot of ways toughest questions I get asked is how do you find your MRV? So MRV is a concept that we've talked a lot about, especially Dr. Mike Israetel. And your MRV is your maximum recoverable volume, the most training that you can tolerate and recover. And recovering is going to be defined as a return to baseline, like a return to the ability to do normally expected training. So if this week you squatted 300 for 4 sets of 8, and next week you went in and tried to do 310 and you went 8, 6, 6, 4, that would probably indicate that you are not recovered. So knowing what your MRV is going to be really important to make sure you're training as hard as you possibly can, so you're making the fastest improvement that you can without training too hard, getting into a state of non-functional overreaching, or even worse, overtraining. So the first thing that we need to do in helping you find the best estimate that we can at what your MRV actually is, and you're only ultimately going to be able to find it through trial and error, carefully tracking your training, and all sorts of fatigue indicators along with that, sleep, how your joints feel, how you're performing, of course. So what we're going to try and do here is give you the best starting point based on all these different individual factors. So in doing that, we need to assess the athlete effectively. So whether you're using this for yourself or as a tool with athletes that you coach, these are the questions and the things that are going to be really important to understand in regards to how your athlete likely recovers and how much training they can likely handle. First, we want to go through gender, male and female. That's going to have a big impact, as lower testosterone levels in female athletes and smaller bodies, shorter and lighter, less muscle, means that they often can tolerate higher volumes of training. An athlete's body weight, we break into 4 categories here, from light, and that first number, 57, would be a light female, 75 a light male, all the way up here to super heavy, 90 plus in the female category to 125 plus for our male lifters, middle and heavy in between. And body weight and even more so muscle mass is going to be significant there. The more muscle an athlete has, the more muscle they have to damage during training, and that more damaged muscle is going to take a little bit longer to recover, be a little bit harder to recover. Height is going to be significant for the athlete. Again, the first number is for female athletes, the second number for male athletes, going from short, medium, tall, and very tall. The taller an athlete is, the farther the bar is moving on every rep. So they are doing more work per rep. And as we're going to be talking about MRV in terms of a number of sets, of overloading sets per week, if they're moving the bar farther on every rep, they've done cumulatively more work in every set, it's likely that they're not going to be able to do as many sets. Strength, going from low, and for this I'm using the USPA strength standards, which you can find on their website, or I'll link them in the video info below. They break things into classes. Class 3 or 4 would be low strength, moderate, class 2 or 1. High is a master or elite total, or you could even get into doing this on a per lift basis. And then finally, very high strength would be the international elite standard. The stronger an athlete is, the more weight they're lifting, means that that weight is going to be more taxing to their system, more neurologically taxing particularly. And absolute weight is more important than relative weight as well. So the very high strength, super heavyweight lifter who's squatting 800 pounds is going to be generating more fatigue than the very high strength 75 kilo class lifter who maybe is squatting 550 pounds, just because 800 is more than 550. But a lot of those differences are accounted for in the weight and height categories. Experience is going to be very important in regards to how much training the athlete can tolerate. So we're going to call beginner athletes as athletes with less than 4 years of training experience. Intermediate athletes with 4 to 8 years of experience, advanced athletes 8 to 12 years experience, and very advanced athletes with 12 plus years of experience. And it becomes a little more complicated how experience affects an athlete's ability to tolerate volume, because athletes at the beginning of their career don't need a ton of training to improve. You've felt those beginner gains at some point in your life, as well as they don't have very high special work capacity, so they can't tolerate a lot of training. And then as they get more and more experience, their special work capacity increases. They're able to tolerate more training because they're essentially just in better shape for it. But that is actually going to start to tail off at the end, because they become very advanced. Then they're very likely lifting such heavy weights with that it's becoming more fatiguing, and they're operating so close to the maximum of their career potential that every rep and every set that they do is generating more fatigue, so they likely won't need to or be able to recover from quite as many sets as they could earlier, and there may be a buildup of injuries along with that in a 12+ year training career. Age is, of course, very important in your ability to recover. I remember training 3-4 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week when I was in high school, and even the thought of doing what I used to do makes me overtrained now, and I likely did get overtrained at one point during my high school career. But we break athletes into categories by biological age here: less than 19 years old, first category; 20 to 29, 30 to 39, 40 to 49, and 50+ years old. And I get asked all the time about how should I adjust my training. I'm 45 years old, like, what suggestions do you have for me in regards to training? And there's so many different ways that you could arrive at that point in your lifting career. A 45-year-old who's been lifting for 20 years versus a 45-year-old who's been lifting for 2 years is going to be different considerations. But for the same athlete, as they progress in age throughout their career, likely are going to be able to tolerate less training as they get older and older. Diet and sleep are two of the foremost things that are going to contribute to good recovery. So poor diet, we're going to classify as not getting sufficient calories. You're not getting enough to help repair muscles and recover. An average diet, we will call that the calories are where they need to be, but you're not taking into account the macro breakdown of those calories, nor any regards to nutrient timing. And then finally, a good diet, that's when you got your RP template and you're just nailing it. Your calories are on point, with the good macro breakdown, and you're properly timing them around training. Sleep, that's when the most recovery is going to be happening, when you're sleeping. So if you have poor sleep, sleeping less than 5 hours a night, we'll call average 5 to 7 hours a night, and good sleep habits would be consistently 7+ hours per night. Stress away from training. Your body doesn't know the difference between a squat, a exam at university, arguments with your significant other. It knows stresses being imposed upon it and the fatigue that generates from those stimulus. So if you're working, third shift manual labor work versus someone who sits at a desk, or like me, works from home and maybe has kind of Netflix on in the background as I write programs and review athletes' videos, you could go from high away from training stress to low away from training stress, and that has to be accounted for because your body doesn't understand that it doesn't differentiate what the stress is. It just understands stimulus and stress. So you can rate yourself there as high away from training stress, medium away from training stress, or low. Performance enhancing drugs, of course, those matter in terms of how much training you're going to be able to tolerate. We're going to get into talking about a little bit about the magnitude in which they matter, but we'll keep this simple and just go with yes or no in regards to performance enhancing drug use. Potentially could I add a third category there of like no, yes, or hell yes, and in regards to the amounts that are being used? Possibly, but I'm going to stay away from that for now. And finally, our last one, historical recovery ability. What kind of training have you done in the past? How did you respond to that? This is the best way that I can account for genetics, the genetic recovery ability, because I don't have some way to go in and extract your DNA and look at all the different genes that are going to contribute to this. So we just need to be a bit subjective and think critically about how you've responded to training in the past, whether you think that you generally have a poor ability to recover, below average, average, good, or you have an exceptional ability to recover. I've always been able to train at a pretty high volume, especially considering where I'm at on some of these height, weight, strength, and experience categories. So with that, that's going to influence whether we tend a little bit to the higher side or a little bit to the lower side as we find our MRV. So we're going to go through this big questionnaire. You're going to answer all these questions for yourself. Your athletes can answer them, but if you want to print that out or something, I can put the PowerPoint in the comments as well. You can download it, circle, do what you need to do there. We have some established MRV ranges. Myself, Dr. Mike, Dr. James, in creating scientific principles of strength training, outlined some MRV ranges there. We've tweaked them since then, with just experience and observation and tracking what the athletes I do, what benefits them the most. So during hypertrophy, our overloading sets per week, so sets that fall within a stimulating enough range to drive hypertrophic adaptations, which generally is about 60 to 75% intensity for sets of 6 to 12 reps. Squat, bench, and deadlift all generate different amounts of fatigue, with deadlift being the most fatiguing and bench being the least. So I tend to find that people in the squat their MRV tends to fall in the 10 to 16 sets per week range. The bench maybe from 14 up to 20, the deadlift from 6 to 12 sets per week. You can see the different ranges there for strength at the different lifts and peaking. So this first number is just as overall for the phase, and then this is a breakdown by the specific numbers, or by the specific lifts. All right, so we have this chart that's going to help us visualize and better understand how these different categories affect our MRV. So over on the left, we have the low volume factors, which the magnitude is going to go all the way down to taking 5 sets away from our MRV over here at -5. Here on the right, are going to be more of the factors that are going to cause a increase in MRV, and our scale is going to go all the way up to 5, to adding 5 sets per week. So we're going to use 2 athletes as examples here. 2 athletes that I coach, Marissa Inda, Brandon Allen, about as far away on these 2 categories as possible. But this should also help illustrate that the training isn't necessarily going to change by type, rather just by magnitude. So we're going to go through and circle all Marissa's in red and Brandon's in blue. All right, so pretty straightforward on the first one. Brandon, male, that's not going to affect, it's not going to raise or lower his MRV. With Marissa, female, is going to make a big increase in her MRV up to adding 5 sets per week. So, and remember, we're starting at those midpoint numbers. So for the squat, we're starting at 13 sets, and now we're going to adjust from there. Next, their body weight, opposite sides of the spectrum here. Brandon is a super heavyweight lifter, weighing about 335, 340 pounds. So we're going to take 4 sets away per week from his MRV based on that. Marissa, a lightweight lifter. She competes in the 52 kilo class, walks around right there, 52, 53 kilos. Lighter lifters can generally handle more training, so we're going to add 4 sets per week to Marissa's MRV. Height is going to be very significant based on how far the bar moves. Brandon's about 6'1", so a tall lifter, so we're going to take another set away, -1. Marissa, very short, 5 feet tall, maybe even a little bit less, but she doesn't like to admit it. So we're going to add 2 sets to her MRV, a +2 there. Hopefully you can see as the number, we're just pulling it down from up above there. Both lifters, extremely accomplished, very high strength levels. They would both be pretty far above even the international elite classification on those USPA charts that we're using. And because they're very strong, they're lifting heavy weights close to the limit of their career potential, and very neurally fatiguing, as well as fatiguing to the connective tissue, muscles, skeletal system. We're going to take 3 sets per week away from their MRV. Again, both lifters are very advanced. Marissa will turn 42 a couple weeks after making this video, and she has been training consistently 4+ days per week, every week since she was 17 years old. Brandon grew up playing football, high school football, college football, has been lifting since he was about 13, 14 years old, and he's getting ready to turn 30 later this year. So they would both fall into the very advanced range in regards to experience, and we're going to take 2 sets away from their MRV. Even though they've built up tremendous special work capacity because of it, since they're so close to their career peaks, the training they're doing is very taxing, very fatiguing, as well as maybe accumulation of stress and small injuries along the way. Age is the next factor for us to consider. The older you are, the more difficult it is generally to recover. So Marissa, who turns 42 later this year, we're going to take 2 sets away on her MRV because of that. Brandon, 29, will turn 30 later this year, but for right now we'll put him in the 20s, and we're going to add 1 set to his MRV because of that. Now, I know that there's a big difference between 20 and 29, so you can factor that in appropriately as someone might be right on the cusp. These next factors: diet, sleep, and stress away from training. Brandon has improved his diet a ton, and lost about 60-70 pounds at one point from his peak, and does a generally good job with his diet, but I don't think that he's tracking it that specifically and timing all the year throughout. So we'll just say average diet for him. Marissa has a very small appetite, so she eats what she wants. She doesn't track all the time, so she's getting the calories. They're both getting the calories that they need, but maybe not nailing the precision that we'd be looking for in the good diet. So we'll say that they have an average diet. You can see that a poor diet all the way over at -3 has poor diet's going to take much more away from your training than a good diet at +1 is going to give to it. So average and good, yes, there is improvements to be made there, and extra gains to be had, but it's not a massive difference. But if you have a poor diet, you're really inhibiting your ability to recover from hard training. Sleep is going to be very similar to the diet, where poor sleep, less than 5 hours a night, is going to have a huge impact taking away your ability to recover, where sleeping great is going to help, definitely, but it's not this huge benefit beyond the average sleep. So I put both of them into the average category, sleeping 5 to 7 hours a night consistently. Stress away from training. Brandon owns his gym, Filthy Power, in Las Vegas. Marissa does personal training, online coaching. Neither of them are manual labor jobs, though being self-employed has its own stress that comes along with it. But we'll say that both of them have a low stress away from training, so they're going to get a +1 on their MRV for that. All right, next category: performance enhancing drug use. Marissa, competing in the USAPL IPF, undergoes out of competition drug testing, all that stuff. We've talked about that in plenty of podcasts. Drug-free lifter, get in the know. Brandon Allen, if you follow him on Instagram or have ever heard him talk anywhere ever, I'm not telling you any secrets here. We'll give him the big yes over there. How that affects recovery. The magnitude of this is something that we took a lot of consideration into. So saying no isn't taking away from the MRV, while the yes is adding 3 sets. And there's probably some people who think it should be +5 sets or +10 sets. But the reality of it is it does some things that do allow you to train more volume. Like it does help repair muscle tissue and improve the nitrogen uptake and all that stuff. But it also means that you have more muscle, which more muscle is going to mean that you're heavier, and that's going to take away your ability to recover. It's going to mean that you're lifting heavier weights, and heavier weights are harder to recover from. It's not going to improve the recovery of the connective tissue the same way that it does of the muscles, or of bone structures the same way that it does the muscles. So it's not really improving the capacity there. So while it may even diminish those abilities to recover or lower those MRVs because the weights you're using are heavier. So yes, it does help, but it is not just this, it doesn't just mean that you get to do as much training as you can possibly imagine and continually recover from it. So we're going to add 3 sets to Brandon's MRV, and Marissa's will be unaffected there. Finally, the last category: historical recovery ability. How well have these athletes recovered from previous training? Marissa comes from a long bodybuilding physique training background, very, very high volumes, gymnastics career before that. And even though she is in her early 40s, I'm going to rate her as an exceptional recovery ability. Brandon, I've been coaching Brandon for about 3 years now, And judging on those 3 years and that he did lower volume training and just kind of maxed out a lot previous to that, doesn't have tremendous special work capacity, so we're just going to rate him as average. I wouldn't say it's poor or below average by any means. He's got great genetics, he is an exceptional lifter, so we'll just rate him at average. So we're going to add 2 sets to Marissa's MRV because of that. So taking into account all of those factors that we just talked about, and that again, you can print out that page from the link below and circle those for yourself if you prefer to do it that way. But we have all these different factors, and again, we started at 13 sets per week in the squat, 17 on the bench, and 9 sets per week in the deadlift, and we're just talking hypertrophy for the purposes of this video. So we go through all these different factors, and these are the MRVs that we are left with for Marissa Inda and Brandon Allen. You can see this big difference. Squat, 20 sets per week of work for Marissa in the squat, and only 7 sets in hypertrophy, the highest volume time for Brandon. Marissa doing up to 24 sets per week of training directed at improving the bench press. So everyone always asks, like, what do these sets per week mean? Again, it's sets that are within the overloading range, that are stimulating enough to drive adaptation for that particular phase. So things that could go into the squat during hypertrophy, which is a bit more general, as of course any squat or squat variation, as well as exercises like leg press, hack squat, walking lunges, step ups, split squats. Those can all be counted. Now, doing 20 sets of squats for Marissa would be certainly different than doing 20 sets of leg press or 20 sets of walking lunges, and that's going to deal with how much fatigue each exercise generates, and that's going to be a video for another day. But I'll just say exercises that fall under that umbrella, and you all have enough common sense, hopefully, to understand that the big exercises count a little bit differently than the smaller exercises. For the bench, that's going to be bench in any of its big variations, as well as stuff like flies, skull crushers, machine chest pressing. During hypertrophy could all fall under that category. During strength and peaking, it's going to it's going to get a little bit more specific to the competition exercise, what's going to count in there. 24 sets for Marissa, 11 sets for Brandon. The deadlift and deadlift variations, back raises, good mornings, barbell hip thrust, those are all going to fall into these categories during hypertrophy. 14 sets for Marissa, only 4 sets for Brandon. So why is this big discrepancy? How does this manifest itself? And these numbers, I can tell you, are very accurate for both of these lifters. I coach them both and have done so for several years. Marissa has weeks in the squat, her overreaching week during a hypertrophy block. She might be doing 8 or 9 sets of 6 to 8 reps on Monday. On Wednesday, probably doing some belt squatting, 3 or 4 sets of belt squats, and then on Friday following that up with another 5 to 6 sets. So we're getting right at about 20 sets, and again, we're using this as a tool to find the best estimate that we can, so you can, through trial and error, find this in the course of 1 or 2 training cycles rather than it taking 5, 6, maybe 10 training cycles to get to a good number. Brandon generally has 1 big squat workout per week and 1 bigger deadlift workout with some accessory squatting after it. So that big squat workout for him is probably the biggest ones, 4 to 5 sets of 6 to 8 really hard sets of work. We're talking about a guy who squatted 975 pounds in reps and over 900 pounds in training in sleeves. So every set he does, if he's doing hard sets of 8, that's like over 600 pounds for sets of 8. That's very fatiguing very fast. So he might have one day where he does 4 or 5 of those, and then a second day after he deadlifts, he's doing a couple sets of leg press. Still hard, not quite as fatiguing, and that's going to give us that number about 7 or 8. Maybe if it could potentially be 5 sets on the squat one day and then 4 sets of leg press on the other day, and because leg press isn't quite as fatiguing, that number gets a little bit higher. On the bench for Marissa, Marissa is one of the best benchers in the world, 97.5 kilos at 52 kilos body weight, American record, which she's broken time and time again. So this number is maybe a little bit high for Marissa specifically, but pretty close to it, where she's benching twice a week. She's done as high as 11 sets of 8 of bench and bench variations in a single workout there. That would be on like a Tuesday, and then she'd follow that up later in the week on a Saturday with maybe 7 or 8 sets. So they were getting to 18, 19 sets, and then filling in the rest of this stuff with maybe dumbbell pressing variations, direct tricep work, and shoulder work. Brandon has benched 573 pounds. So 11 sets a week for him. Might be 4 or 5 sets of bench on his first bench workout of the week on a Tuesday, let's say, followed up by another 2 or 3 sets of a smaller accessory work, whether that's chest press or dumbbell pressing variations or direct tricep work like skull crushers. And then later in the week, he's going to do some military press and maybe some board pressing for 2 or 3 sets of each one to fill out those 11 sets per week. In the deadlift, during hypertrophy, 14 sets per week. For Marissa, that's going to be a big workout on Wednesday, maybe up to 5 or 6 sets of deadlifting or pulls from a low block, sets 6 to 8 reps, followed up by maybe some vert pulls, RDLs, back raises, and then a smaller workout later in the week after her secondary squatting work. She'll do a little bit of extra deadlifting. Again, another variation, vert pulls, RDLs, or a block pull commonly. Typically, conventional deadlifters will have a little bit lower MRV than sumo deadlifters, as a sumo is not quite as fatiguing. For Brandon, huge deadlifter, 843 pounds, very, very close attempt at 887 at the US Open. 4 sets of really hard deadlift work in a single week is going to be very fatiguing to him. If he's pulling hard for sets of 6, that's going to be well into the 650 into the low 700 pound range. So he's not going to be able to do 6 or 7 sets up at the weights that he needs to drive adaptation. And this could manifest itself a lot of different ways. One week maybe it means he's doing 6 hard sets, and the next week maybe only 2 hard sets. So we have some undulation worked into that. But hopefully this is helping you gain a better understanding of how all these factors effectively, practically affect an athlete's MRV. We could do this for hypertrophy. You could plug in those numbers for strength. You could plug them in for peaking and get your results for that. So if you want to learn more about how to find your MRV, different volume landmarks, here are some resources. I'll link as many as I can through the cards so you can just click on them on the screen, or we'll put them down in the video info. The book, Scientific Principles of Strength Training. If you haven't read it and you're serious about understanding training, you must read it. Watch the accompanying YouTube video series featuring yours truly. If you rather look and listen than read, that'll help you out as well. Particularly the videos about fatigue management, SRA, and individual differences will pertain to what we talked about today. Check out the Jug Life episode with Dr. Mike Israetel, Scientific Muscle Building. Pretty early episode, but a ton of great info in it. And finally, read the book by Dr. Mike and Dr. James Hoffman, How Much Should I Train?, in which they establish these different volume landmarks from minimum volume, the least amount of training you can do to stay the same, to minimum effective volume, maximum adaptive volume, and what we talked about today, maximum recoverable volume. So hopefully that gives you a better understanding of this concept, how to better find your MRV. It's going to give me a video that I can just link to people when we get asked all the time, how do I find my MRV? So I'm going to be able to save myself some time with that, and I'm excited about that. So if you enjoyed the video, like it, share it with a friend who needs it, and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.